Hi, everyone. Welcome. Really happy. Thank you so much for joining today. Um, and Natalie, thank you for pulling up our slides. Can you go ahead and advance to the first slide? I'll start us off with some introductions. I'm Lauren Cada. With me today are colleagues Natalie Milbrow, Stephen Seeloff, JC Voss. It's our pleasure to be facilitating today's Choose Your Own Metadata Adventure workshop. I am a university archivist and assistant academic librarian for archives and special collections at New York University, Abu Dhabi. I'm joining you. It's 7:30 p.m. in Abu Dhabi. Yeah, happy to be with you. Natalie is Metadata Services Coordinator and Director of the Queen's Memory Project at the Queen's Public Library in Queens, New York. Stephen is Senior Editor and Collection Manager of Baylor University Institute for Oral History in Waco, Texas. And JC is Special Collections Coordinator and University Archivist at the University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And together, for the past almost 10 years, we've been working together as the Metadata Task Force of the Oral History Association. Natalie, could you please advance to the next slide? Each of us has experience individually as interviewers, project coordinators, and as practitioners collecting, preserving, and making accessible oral history collections. And collectively, we are aligned around the importance of metadata specific to oral history, acknowledging the complex, multidimensional nature of oral history, which often makes describing oral history challenging. And we imagine that many of you are here today because you are also engaging with the complexities of oral history and oral history description. As a task force, we've surveyed those in the US who are engaged in some capacity with managing and describing oral history. A report of that survey is published as a white paper on the Oral History Association website if you're interested in learning more about that. And informed by what we learned from how colleagues are describing, managing, and cataloging, we developed what we are calling an oral history metadata assessment toolkit. It's a toolkit that could also be described as an approach to oral history metadata, an approach and a process that we'll be demonstrating in today's workshop. So at the center of our assessment toolkit in today's workshop is the list, a comprehensive list of oral history specific metadata elements that we've spent years crowdsourcing, vetting, fine-tuning, developing, and integrating into this toolkit, into this approach. And this list is not a metadata schema. It is purposefully schema and system agnostic. This elements list is also massive. It's intended to contain as many possible types of information that an oral history practitioner may want to collect, capture, or share about their oral histories, depending on their context, which we'll share more about. So it's comprehensive, but it's not intended to be prescriptive, as you'll experience a little bit today. Alongside other types of information, the list is meant to be used as a tool to help in decision making about how to describe oral history in the context of a particular project or an institutional context in its full form. It's meant to be useful regardless of what system, software your project or institution uses, and also useful across all stages of the oral history life cycle. So that's just a little bit of background about who we are, what we care about, what our work is about, and we're really excited to engage with you and hear what you think about this. Our session today will be interactive, choose your own adventure style opportunity to engage with this process using a hypothetical scenario that has the goal of making oral history well described and understood. And we're also looking forward to time for a really good discussion about the value of assessment, the value of assessing how we describe our oral histories at every stage. And now I will pass it on to Natalie.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren. And I'm going to just take you quickly to the site that has our toolkit that you will be able to go and visit now if you wish. I think we're putting a link in the chat. but that we really recommend you go to after this session when you're working with your team. And just to be clear, we understand that oral history teams are really all shapes and sizes, and that it might just be you and like a couple of really excited volunteers, or it might be you and a very large and specialized staff. But whether you are starting a new project or whether you have an existing collection or set of collections, we believe that this is a useful exercise for teams to undertake. So on the site that is our toolkit site, it starts out with just this little blurb here about what the project is about and who we are. And then it pretty quickly goes into the 4 steps that we recommend that you follow. And today's session is really set up as a train the trainer session. So we're going to be stepping you through these 4 steps of the process so that you will feel confident to go back and be able to do them. So the first thing that we recommend is to review the practitioner profiles that all of us have donated to the project, which is basically like, us describing the projects and collections and organizations that we belong to in our context as professionals. And then talking about how the resources and limitations of those contexts have impacted our metadata decisions. So metadata decisions should really be based on the people who are creating the metadata, the people who are creating the oral histories, the people who are going to be using them. And these profiles will give you an idea of the kinds of considerations that have impacted our metadata decisions where we work. Then second, we encourage you to complete a practitioner profile yourself. So when you click this, it gives you a PDF to download, and it gives you a little paragraph in the beginning in case this worksheet gets to you out of context and you don't know what it is. And then it's just 7 questions that you can step through and answer that will kind of prompt you to think about what aspects of your project, what aspects of your organization and capabilities should determine what kind of metadata you're capturing and preserving for the long term. Then once you've done that and you have that in mind, you can jump into the elements list. So this is, as Lauren mentioned, a very large and comprehensive list. It has over 100 elements. And the way that we've organized them, just for clarity's sake, is into different life cycle groupings. So here in the element picker tool on the site, it gives you, again, a little blurb describing what's going on. And then as you advance through the pages, you move to metadata elements that are for different parts of an oral history project. So in the planning phase, these are all of the things that we know oral history practitioners are out there collecting metadata-wise and preserving for the future. So some of them are kind of esoteric and some of them are extremely basic, like in the interview phase, which is the section of the complete metadata list that we're going to be using today for the purposes of this workshop. There are things that are like the name of the person who was interviewed that everybody's going to choose. But then, there are also things that are a little bit more like a choice that maybe not every collection would make, like the names of family members of the person who was interviewed could have some really great purpose and function, but could also be something that is just not possible for your team to collect. So the way this picker tool works is you just select things. And as you go through and select them and move through the different pages and the different life cycle phases, then you at the end are able to download your customized list. And so you can get that in like a spreadsheet format where you can see what things you have selected and what things you have not selected. And that takes us to the final stage that we recommend, which is to take that spreadsheet and here is an example of how it looks, where you'll have the element name, you'll have a description of what that element name means, and then you're going to, see which things you've selected. And then what we suggest as a final step is to mark where you store that information. And what I mean by that is, are you bringing the name of the interviewer all the way through into a public catalog record, or is that just going to stay in an administrative kind of place? And we'll get more into this as we advance through the workshop today. But those are the complete 4 steps that we suggest that a team undertakes. And that's what we're going to be basing our workshop on today. So with that, I will pass it off to Stephen.
All right, thank you so much, Natalie. So I'm going to share my screen now. And share with you something that Lauren mentioned earlier, which is our hypothetical practitioner profile that we're building. So instead of each of us individually going through this process and creating our own profiles of our own institutions, we're going to build one together today. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go through 7 steps of this potential profile and make decisions as we go along to determine what type of institution, what type of user base we have, how large it is, things like that. So the way this is going to work is Leah is about to share with you a poll that has everything that are on these slides included. So all 7 questions included, but I'm going to just kind of walk through each of these. So if you want to follow along, you can. If you want to work ahead, you can. But we're going to work through these 7. The entire room is going to choose their own oral history adventure here. And then once we're done, we'll get a look and see what our hypothetical institution and oral history project looks like. Okay, so our first question here is, what is the mission and nature of your program and collection? So our choices are, we're just a community history project run by a local public library in a small town. Or B, perhaps we're documenting the history of student activism on a large university campus that will be held in a university archive. Or the C option is an LGBTQ plus community center located in a large city documenting local LGBTQ plus history. Okay, so once we make our decision there, then we think about the next question. Are we collecting materials other than oral histories? Yes, we're going to collect books, archival materials, whatnot to live alongside these oral histories, or no, we are focused solely on this dedicated oral history collection. Okay, question number 3. What percentage of your collections are oral histories? 100%. So like if we're collecting only oral histories, it might be 100%. If we're not, how is the balance shaped out? 50%? As far as the other items that we're collecting or have in our collection, or is it less than 10%? Our oral history is actually just a small part of the greater archive. So how big is or are these oral history collections that we're collecting? Are we talking about a huge collection of 1,000 interviews? Maybe a smaller collection, but still a decent amount of 300 interviews, or a very small collection of less than 50 interviews. Okay, now we're going to talk about our user base a little bit. What are your researchers' current or projected characteristics and needs? The choices are A, researchers are experienced, fully online, digital access to recordings and transcripts, and expect robust descriptive metadata to effectively search the collection. So these are the people emailing you at 3 a.m. in the morning. The B choice is community members expect access to interview materials on site or in person, so reasonable. Or C, patrons are not very familiar with oral histories and probably need some hands-on guidance with how to navigate and use an oral history collection. Okay, and then we're moving on to privacy considerations for both our participants and our researchers. So what are their expectations? A, since many interviews are with people who are still living and active in the community, many interviewees are requesting restricted access on their oral histories. B, some of these interviews are about controversial topics, and staff have decided to close access for 20+ years. Or C, interviews primarily document innocuous community history, and many interviewees are no longer living, so there are few privacy concerns. And then the final question, what are your staffing limitations and strengths? So are you well-staffed? 5 paid full-time staff at a dedicated oral history program, such as mine. B, 2 archivists working on oral history projects as projects come up and needs arise. Or C, simply 1 full-time staff with a team of volunteers. So make your way through those questions, enter your answers, and then Leah is going to provide us with the results here shortly. What do we think? 1 more minute, Leah? I'm not going to vote myself.
Yeah, there was a bit of an issue with the poll the first time it launched, so we'll give folks a minute or 2 to get through it.
Okay, that sounds good. And so when the poll closes, we're going to collect all of your answers here on this slide. And then this will be the slide that we'll be able to share with everyone so that they'll have the full set of answers and they'll be able to see their hypothetical oral history project for the rest of the activities that we have planned for you today. All right, we'll do 1 more minute, Leah. All right, I'm going to stop the share for a second and then see what our poll results look like. All right. So hopefully everyone can see the poll results. So our first, let me go ahead and bring up the slides again because we don't have the full titles in there. Okay. So we chose a community history project by a local public library in a small town. And then we said, yes, we are collecting other materials other than oral histories. As far as what percentage of your collections are oral histories, less than 50% was the answer. So obviously a lot more going on at this local library. How large is the oral history collection? This was a tight battle, but it was less than 50 interviews. So this is a pretty small effort. And then what about our researchers? Our patrons are not very familiar with oral histories and need some hands-on guidance. Makes sense for a small town library. Oh my, oh, we had a tie. Oh my goodness. We didn't think of this possibility. Okay, let's see here. Should I flip a coin?
Let's choose the dicier one so that we have some privacy considerations to worry about.
Okay, Natalie likes complexity. So
yeah.
We're going to go with the first answer, the first 38%, which is since many interviews are with people who are still living and active in the community, many interviewees request restricted access on their oral histories. So considering what we've chosen to this point, let's say this is a fairly recent effort. So these are all individuals who have probably given their oral history testimony recently. Okay, and then the staffing, this makes a lot of sense as well. 1 full-time staff with a team of volunteers makes sense for a local library. Okay, and so JC's done a great job of combining all of our answers, and this is our hypothetical profile. So congratulations, everyone. We've willed an oral history collection into existence here. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to transition to JC, who's going to explain the activity that we're going to undertake using our hypothetical practitioner profile here. And while she explains it, I'm going to go back to the worksheet that you were provided for the activity today, so she can describe more about how we're going to work through that worksheet. So JC, take it away.
Yes, thanks, Stephen. So what we're going to do next is actually practice making decisions about which metadata elements that you would choose to capture and include for the hypothetical oral history project that we just came up with. We're going to spend about 20 minutes making these decisions, and then we'll have some small group discussion. So everyone should have a copy of this worksheet, and it lists out all the elements from the interview phase of the oral history lifecycle. So you're just going to go through this list, and then thinking from the perspective of the hypothetical practitioner profile that we just generated, you're going to decide whether you would select a given element to include at your hypothetical institution or not. Things like staffing and privacy concerns and user needs will possibly factor into your decisions. So just keep that in mind when you're making your selections. And then you're just going to mark in the select column on the worksheet whether you would choose to include that element or not. So how we're going to do this is it's going to be a solo exercise for everyone to complete, and then we will discuss our decisions in small groups. So to do this, we're going to move into 4 breakout rooms with a task force member as a facilitator in each room in case any issues arise or questions come up. So you're going to spend the first 10 to 15 minutes just going through the list on your own, making your own decisions and marking them on the sheet. And then we're going to spend the last 5 or so minutes in our breakout rooms having small group discussion so that we can discuss your decisions, any differences that came up, questions, things like that. And then we're all going to come back together as a whole group for further discussion. Just a couple things to note before we go into the breakout rooms. So for the purpose of today's activity, your worksheet only has the interview stage elements. So like Natalie mentioned, when we were looking at the whole list of elements, there's lots of other elements that you might capture at other stages. But just since we don't have a ton of time together today, we're only going to focus on the interview stage. And that'll hopefully give you a good taste of this process. So with that in mind, don't worry too much if you think there's an element that's missing from the list that you see right now, just because it's probably included somewhere else in the full oral history life cycle. So just don't get too caught up on that. And again, you'll have access to that full list of elements through the Archipelago site that we shared earlier. We are going to keep the practitioner profile up so that you can refer back to that when you're making your decisions. And again, if you have any questions, all of us will be, each of us will be in a breakout room. So just you can ask us if you need anything. And I think we're ready to start. So everyone can join a breakout room. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for the good group discussions. I hope every breakout room had a fruitful conversation. So at this point, now that we're all back together and we've gone through these different activities, we want to hear from you. We just want to open up the floor to some discussion about what you've thought about this experience, whether these activities have been helpful, when you might actually apply them or not. And if you have questions for us, now would also be a good time to do that. Stephen, will you share the slide that has the questions? Awesome, thank you. So yeah, we wanted to just open this up and ask you if you found this useful, when and why you would do this, if there were any big takeaways from your groups. So if you would like to share some of your thoughts or questions in the chat, that would be fine. Or if you want to say it out loud, then you can unmute yourself and maybe raise your hand so we can not have multiple people talking at once. I'll give you a minute to think about your takeaways and any questions that you have. Holly.
Yeah, so yes, this was useful to get me thinking about some of the metadata items that I might consider using. I'm going into digitizing some obsolete audiovisual stuff, which does include some oral histories. So I'm looking forward to hopefully making those more accessible through good metadata. I will be uploading those to New York Heritage, and I was wondering if you had experience using their metadata fields and how, I don't know, I'm not really sure what I'm asking. if these sorts of items are available in New York Heritage and how that works for you, if you've used it.
I have not used that. I don't know, Natalie, I'm in Iowa, so I just haven't used that. But Natalie, have you used that before?
You know, I'm familiar with it as a platform, but we have not used it at Queens Public Library. But I know that they do have a standard set of metadata that they look for, and we can probably walk you through it. Also, I think that they would be probably flexible, like there would be things that you could capture that wouldn't even shoehorn into a particular metadata field for your record, and it would be fine for you to keep it separately or for you to keep it in you know, extra fields that would maybe not even be in the public record.
Hi, I'm Nicole Minkesi. I'm with the Long Island Library Resources Council, and I'm one of the facilitators for New York Heritage on the Long Island region. So we use Content DM, and we map to DAX, and so we are describing archival content. So as far as adding some of these fields, it's something definitely to discuss with my other counterpoints in the state. I think that I mentioned earlier in one of the breakout chats about a number of things that we just when it comes to this sort of thing, we really just have that notes open field to add sort of extra data that we don't have in our normal field set. So it's definitely something to consider. I personally feel like this is a really a good platform to just I guess to further open up the discussion about adding more fields and seeing how they might map out so that the interoperability of exchanging this metadata, between different platforms and how that would work. So it's definitely a discussion to have with the folks at New York Heritage. So thanks for asking, Holly.
Yeah, we at this point have not developed crosswalks to different standards or schemas, but that is we'll talk about that in a minute, I guess, but that's something that is one of our future goals to kind of just help make this more easy to adopt at different institutions. We recognize that a lot of places have their own systems and schemas in place. And so our list is not meant to like replace that, but we're hoping that they can kind of work together and that this activity will help you think about if there are other pieces of information you would want to capture as well outside of the existing system or schema that you use.
I'll just chime in too that I know we get a lot of collections that are oral history collections made by individual journalists or students, that kind of thing. And we're hoping, you know, if they have the information in a spreadsheet or in a Word doc or like however they have kept it, we're so happy to get it as the library because we can structure it and put it into our record type. But I think that, you know, if people have gotten the information itself, that is like 90% of the way there. And then you figure out a place to like shove it into a record.
Mm-hmm. We kind of talked about that a little bit in our breakout room, how there might be additional information that you don't just, for whatever reason, because it's more sensitive information or you just don't have the staff resources to do this, that you might not put in a public record, but that you might keep. So even having a note in the record, like additional information available at the reading room desk or something like that, you could indicate that there's additional information as well, even if it's not in the public record. Any other questions for us or takeaways or thoughts on whether this was something that you would actually do?
So I can share a little bit from my group, which caught me off guard with how quickly things shut down. But we are having a good conversation at the last minute or so about, we've already identified these are the fields that we think are interesting, but then the private versus public. This is all good information to hold, but maybe only a third of this will actually ever go public, especially for a collection that has restriction considerations. But then there was also Paige shared a thought of maybe anonymize certain information that we're collecting and use it to inform either future projects or to do general analyses of our holdings to get a sense of maybe what we want to do in the future or the holes that we have and things like that. So kind of a third option, so to speak, private, public, and then for further data use, I would say, data analysis. So that I thought that was interesting.
I think we might have time for maybe one more question or thought before we want to move to the next section.
I'll just jump in for if we don't have any comments and just mention that we've had these experiences with our larger group of stakeholders, volunteers, students, interns, staff that wouldn't normally be affiliated with metadata creation. And we've gotten into these kind of nitty-gritty workshop-y kind of discussions, and people are way more into it than what you would think. So as you are thinking about next steps with this tool and about who those stakeholders in your project would be that you would bring in, I would encourage you to consider maybe inviting more people than what you would initially think, because people kind of do like get into it once they get into the weeds of the activity.
All right, well, Lauren, do you want to take us to the next part?
Yeah, I think Natalie, what you just kind of wrapped us up in is related to what we wanted to close out the workshop with, which is inviting you. Do we have the slide up? Yes, inviting you to think about, okay, now what? Like, what are the next steps? If we wanted to think of this as a train the trainer type of exercise. So as Natalie mentioned, like really think about, you know, I mean, and I know this wouldn't be the case if you're doing your own project or you're kind of a lone arranger, but like, who are the stakeholders to help assess the metadata that you are already creating and collecting, what you might want to start adding. You know, think about using those 7 questions as sort of prompts to help you and your organization, or you know, your group or your project. Please try out the full elements list. So today we just looked at one section of it. And so many ideas came out of that and thinking. And so it would be really interesting, I think, to maybe if you have time to take that further. And the link that JC just put in the chat to the website where our, you know, that Natalie showed at the beginning does have downloads. You'll see on the front page, there's a couple of different formats you can download the full elements list. Thinking more about where you are storing the elements, I think, you know, kind of opened up our minds a little bit more about that. And, you know, we used this hypothetical and you know, I'd be really curious about what that is like, thinking about your own institution and where you're keeping those different types of information. Yeah, and then just, you know, everything that would go into an assessment project, whatever your context is, that might mean, yeah, you're going to, you know, as Nicole was mentioning, you're going to recommend that new fields are added, or, you know, the workflow will be expanded in some way. So with that, and JC kind of referenced a little bit that we're looking ahead ourselves as a task force and with this toolkit. So I want to turn it over to close it out to Stephen to share a little bit more about that. And thank you again, everyone, for being so engaged.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Could everyone see the slides right now? Can you all see the slide? Okay. All right, just want to make sure. So the upcoming steps for us as a task force and what we hope to do both in the near future and then for the next few years probably. So the first thing we need to let everybody know is that the website, the archipelago site that Natalie shared with you where the toolkit currently resides will actually be migrating at the end of the month. And that migration will be to the actual Oral History Association website and the Oral History Association page, which we have our own very own metadata page there already, but then there will be more complex in the future to include all of the functionality of the tool. And so it'll kind of be one-stop shopping in the future, but that should happen toward the end of the month, early part of next month. So if you've already bookmarked that archipelago site, it might disappear on you in the next week or so, but just know that we are working on transitioning that right now. We will continue to do our roadshow or our virtual roadshow as we're doing today, and doing more of these train the trainer workshops. I think the next one, Natalie and I are headed up to Philly in about a month for the oral history of the Mid-Atlantic region. So we're trying to crisscross the country and go internationally even and share all the work that we've done in compiling this list, compiling the tool, and how oral history practitioners can incorporate it in their work. And then, as was discussed earlier, crosswalks, this has always been kind of a stretch goal for us, so to speak, and everything that would go into identifying which schema we want to focus on, the priority schema, so to speak, and engage professionals who have a lot of experience in those particular schema, maybe get some funding to help them create the crosswalks or what they view as would be viable crosswalks for our list to their particular schema, and then of course publish them. So that's kind of our long-term goal. Okay. And with that, we would like to very much thank you for attending today. So JC provided our webpage link in the chat. These are our email addresses. If any of you have any follow-up questions you would like to contact us, you can contact us individually there or through the Oral History Association webpage. We have our email there as well. And we hope this was very, very helpful for y'all. And it was so nice to see everyone today. And thank you so much for your participation today as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.